Welcome to Viewpoint on ILTV, where we bring you leading voices in the Middle East and beyond. In this special, we're taking you inside the Israel-Gaza war to hear from stakeholders, thought leaders, and decision makers. I'm Emily Schrader, and today we're speaking with one of Israel's leading journalists who's been reporting on this war from the very start, Lital Shemesh. Lital is a news anchor at Israel's Channel 14. She's also a former combat soldier in the IDF, and she's the author of the book, Pay for Slay, Exposing the Palestinian Authority's Scheme to Pay for Terrorism. Lital, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Emily, for having me.
Just to start, can you describe what your October 7th was like? How did the series of events that day as a journalist impact you?
So I think for all of us in Israel, that was a traumatizing day. I don't think we're really still understanding the, how large this terror attack was. Basically, the largest terror attack from the establishment of the State of Israel. And I think for us at the beginning, especially for me as a journalist, we didn't fully understood the enormous, the number of terrorists who were entering Israel, the numbers of cities who were invaded. So we immediately covered it from the base. We had reporters being sent to all the different cities. And I think for us in Israel, it will take a long, long time to really heal and understand what we've been through.
Now, for you personally, where were you on October 7th when you realized? Were you woken up by rockets? When did you start your job as a journalist on that particular day?
Yeah, so I was actually at my brother's house with all of the family up north, so I wasn't in the range of the rockets. And I work for Channel 14, which is a Shomer Shabbat channel. So we only start airing at the end of Shabbat, unfortunately, at the end of Shabbat of that evening. We started broadcasting immediately.
I think it's interesting, actually. Some of the people who especially abroad, who keep Shabbat, who observe the Shabbat, they didn't know. They didn't know anything, and they woke up to this shocking news.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, in regards to the types of content that has come out, I mean, on that day, I think journalists, perhaps more than anyone, received awful, horrific, shocking content. What was it like for you to have to see that? I mean, it's your country that's under attack, and you're getting these awful scenes. I mean, you yourself were a combat soldier, so what was that like?
Yeah, exactly as you said. I think all of us were getting that information to our WhatsApp. We're not used to see this enormous terror attack with everything on film. You know, the terrorists were filming it. We were starting getting footage from journalists on the ground, from surveillance cameras, and basically everyone around the world was getting that harsh footage into their phones. And I think, Emily, what shocked me is the fact that everything was filmed, that everything was put out there, and still the world is criticizing us for the operation in Gaza, for our right to defend ourselves, for our right to get into Gaza and to do what's needed. After seeing that horrific attack of innocent civilians were taken from their homes, of poor people, young people who were just celebrating in a music festival and were murdered, innocent people. And I think it's a disgrace to see how the world still has the audacity to criticize Israel to do what it takes to knock down Hamas, because I don't know any other country would have a terror entity invading its territory, butchering over 1,000 people, and not respond and not react.
Now, one of the issues in this war has been the disparity between what's happening on the ground and what the international media has been reporting. What is the most difficult or challenging part of reporting on these issues firsthand? In some cases, you're on the front lines, and then seeing sometimes the complete opposite being told by the international media.
Yeah, I was actually covering this war from inside of Gaza. So I've asked my editor not just to stay in the studio, but to enter Gaza, to cover the things from the ground, to talk to the combat soldiers, to talk to a female paramedic who was serving inside of Gaza, and to show how the IDF is going to the extent of not harming innocent civilians. And then you open CNN, day in, day out, you see stories about Palestinians constantly showing the Palestinian side, when I think the average person who is watching television is not really aware of the full picture. So when you start painting a black and white situation of the poor Palestinians and the strong Israelis who has a strong army, you completely don't get the full picture. We are in a situation where we have 5 countries attacking us. We have rockets from Lebanon and rockets from Yemen, and Iran funding proxies all around our territory. We're fighting for our existence, for our right to have a tiny, tiny Jewish country among 300 million Muslims, and we still have the international media criticizing us for fighting to survive, to basically maintain a country, and that's what I don't understand. You yourself know how it goes on U.S. campuses, how they're being brainwashed to, polarized as the strong and the weak side. With a matter of fact, we are the underdog. We are the only minority in the world who has security guards outside of their synagogues, outside of their museums in Europe. We are the most threatened minority in the world. So I think the international media should really stop with the hypocrisy and show the truth.
I think at the diplomatic level, we've seen initially President Biden was very supportive of Israel. And then as the war continued on, we saw sort of shift. I don't know if shift is even the right word, but new discussions being had that are somehow they view as being related. For example, Biden has been very loud about advocating for a Palestinian state, for the two-state solution, which I think, whether you agree or disagree, isn't even related to this conflict. This conflict is about dealing with Iranian terror proxies. What is your take on Biden's recent statements about two states, about a Palestinian state?
As you said, I think we're very grateful for the cooperation of Israel and America. We're very grateful for them helping us fighting this war, supporting Israel in this war. But I think it's pure disgrace to give the Palestinian an award, literally an award, as a Palestinian state after we've seen the greatest terror attack in the history of the state of Israel. And I'm sure not many people know, but the Palestinian Authority, and that's actually what my book is about, is giving money to terrorists. The third largest ministry in the Palestinian Authority is the Ministry of Shaheeds, the ministry who gives money for prisoners who went and murdered Jews. The more you butcher, the more your salary the more salary you're going to get. If you're sentenced to a life prison, you're going to get 12,000 shekels a month, every month, just by sitting in the Israeli prison. The Nukhba terrorists, the Hamas terrorists who butchered our men and women on October 7th are also getting paid by the Palestinian Authority. So I'm asking you.
Wait, you're telling me that the Palestinian Authority is paying Hamas terrorists for the acts of rape, of murder, of kidnapping on October 7th?
Exactly that. They're paying Palestinian terrorists, Gazan terrorists, and Israeli Arab terrorists who are murdering Jews are getting monthly salaries by the Palestinian Authority. Just recently, we heard the vice of Abu Mazen, Abu Alul, saying, if we will have the last shekel, we would give it to the families of the prisoners. This is the next generation that they're teaching. They're indoctrinating their kids to hate Jews, to murder Jews. You know today that the most profitable occupation in the Palestinian Authority is being a murderer, is being
second only to working for UNRWA.
Yeah, maybe second only to working to UNRWA, but I think the U.S., instead of giving the Palestinians a reward, telling them, here, you can get a country, because you're basically saying to them, the terror attack, this huge terror attack has paid off. We're giving you what you want. And that's exactly the opposite. It's a disgrace for the free world. And by the way, 2018, Donald Trump has passed a law, the Taylor Force law, who says the U.S. will not pass on money to the Palestinians as long as they're paying their terrorists, as long as they're paying people to go and murder Jews. And then Biden came into power, and he decided he's going to transfer the Palestinian money through an NGO called USAID. So he's bypassing the law, giving money to the Palestinians without demanding a very basic demand. Stop paying terrorists. Stop educating your kids to go and murder Jews. Is that too much to ask?
Now, why do you think that is? Obviously, we're assuming here, but why is Biden sort of playing both sides on this issue? Why isn't he taking a stronger stance? We saw Trump cut funding to UNRWA, for example. Biden brought it back. Now, you gave another example about U.S. aid. Why this infatuation almost with giving money to people who are clearly paying terrorists?
I think the Palestinians and the Arab world has done a very good job in painting a picture of a weak and strong side, showing the world that the Palestinians are the poor side, that the Palestinians need to be treated. When you drive today into Ramallah, which is basically a city equals to Tel Aviv, you see houses with swimming pools, but alongside Ramallah, you also see refugees camps. And it was enormously important for the Palestinians to maintain those refugees camps so the world will keep and sending millions of dollars to UNRWA, which just recently we've discovered what UNRWA has been doing and how it was participating in terror attacks, and also sending millions of dollars to the Palestinians, hundreds of millions from each country in Europe. So the more the Palestinians were working on maintaining the poor side story, the more the world feels sorry for them without asking for demands to stop funding terror. And I think this thing has to stop. And I think it's also a combination of purely anti-Semitism. You see how the international media has been covering what is going on now in Israel. For many years, we, inside of Israel, had a tendency of thinking we don't do enough advocacy, we don't explain our story enough. But after October 7th, when you had everything on film, everything was out there, everything was in every single person's iPhones, you're asking yourself, how can the international media not just show the truth of what is happening? And my answer is just purely anti-Semitism and a lot of money, a lot of Arab money who is involved, as you know, in universities, in all different research institutes, and that's a big problem.
Shifting gears a little bit, an image of you went viral, actually internationally, while you were broadcasting, while you were anchoring the news, carrying a weapon. Now, that's not that uncommon. You yourself were a combat soldier, but people seem to be very triggered by the image of a strong combat soldier, news anchor, successful woman. What is your response to some of the comments that have been made, both positive and negative, in regards to this viral image?
Yeah, I think I basically explained, and as you said, it went viral. I got interviewed from the entire world, basically, South America and India. Everyone were asking me about it because it's not a trivial to see a news anchor sitting with her gun. But I think it was important for me to emphasize that I was afraid. I was afraid for my life. I was afraid for my people. After October 7th, I saw what my sisters were going through. I've heard the horrific testimonies about the rape, about the women who's been abducted into Gaza, and I felt I need to defend myself. I was a combat soldier. Just recently, after October 7th, the government allowed people who were serving in combat to carry guns. Up until that day, only 1% of Israelis were carrying guns. It's not as easy to get a gun here as in America. And I think it's our duty to be able to defend ourselves.
Now, regarding Hamas and journalists, I'm sure you know Hamas is using journalists as cover, using them as human shields in some cases, even with international journalists. And then, of course, it was recently revealed that an Al Jazeera journalist is actually a active terrorist with Hamas, a Hamas commander, in fact. What is your response to this cynical abuse of journalism as a cover for terrorism?
Yeah. In this case, not only cover, they were participating in the October 7th massacre. We saw one journalist driving on a motorcycle holding a hand grenade. We saw that on a video. So I think this thing needs to be taken care of. UNRWA activist, a teacher of UNRWA who was holding hostages in his house. Journalists who were participating the October 7th, just like cheering from the side, taking footage of a terrorist taking a poor grandmother, putting her on a motorcycle and driving her into the Gaza Strip.
Incidentally, some of those photographers, I'm sure you know, were actually paid by major news sources, New York Times, BBC.
Yeah.
It's craziness.
Yeah. It's crazy, and it just shows you just look back and think of the coverage of those journalists in the past 10 years, in the past 20 years. How were they covering the situation where they're actively participating in terror acts? Do you really get a true coverage of what is happening in Gaza? Do you really get a true coverage of what is happening in Israel? Or you just get one side, the side that maybe the news outlet wanted to show?
Why do you think that the international media is so happy to take these statistics and the reports from Hamas themselves? Obviously, the most obvious number that comes to mind is the casualty count. The numbers they've been reporting from the Gaza Ministry of Health, which is the Hamas Ministry of Health, have just been regurgitated without any fact-checking, any research on the ground from pretty much every major international media source.
Yeah.
What's your message to these news sources about doing things like this?
Yeah. So, you know, there's a term in journalism that says it bleeds, it leads. And we've seen that throughout the recent operations in Gaza. We were getting rockets, thousands of rockets in every different escalation round. We have the Iron Dome. We have people sitting in shelters. It's not as interesting to show the scary Jewish kids who are sitting in shelters as to see the bombings of the IDF in the Gaza Strip. But I think what is important is to zoom out, to give the people the opportunity to hear the full story, not just a 5-minute segment of what has happened today in Gaza, especially, as you said, they're getting false number from the Ministry of Health, the Gazan Ministry of Health, but to give people the full story of throughout the years, Israel has been using the money to develop all these amazing defense systems like the Iron Dome, while Hamas was building tunnels, was buying rockets, was using all this money for terrorism. And that is why we have the opportunity to defend ourselves, while the Gaza Strip, or the Palestinian Authority, is still wasting millions of dollars on terrorism instead of allowing their people to actually live in wealth. If you ask me, Israel care about the Palestinians more than their leaders care about the Palestinians. And that is what the world just don't understand. Just look at the 20% Israeli Arabs who are living in Israel, who can go to work, who are serving in the Supreme Court, who are serving in the Israeli parliament. This is
even in the army.
Even in the army. This is a perfect example on how Arabs could live in the most, flourishing area in the Middle East. So if you ask me, if anyone is chanting in those pro-Palestinians demonstrations across America, is not really a pro-Palestinian. It's just a pure anti-Israeli demonstrations. Because if you care about the Palestinians, go and demonstrate against Hamas. Go and demonstrate against the corrupted Palestinian Authority who is preventing its own people from getting the money and just using it to fund more and more terror. This thing has to stop.
When it comes to Al Jazeera, in Israel, there has been a push to kick out Al Jazeera from the state of Israel due to their associations with Hamas, as well as several other scandals that they've had before, incitement to violence, especially in their Arabic channel. It's been a major problem. In the United States, Al Jazeera has begun to feel the heat with calls to force them to register under FARA, the Foreign Agent Registration Act, because they are funded by the state of Qatar, which we know has been very controversial in this conflict, as well as on American campuses. What do you think should happen, both in the state of Israel and internationally, when it comes to dealing with media that's unbiased, like Al Jazeera?
Yeah. So we know the problem with Al Jazeera for so many years, and I have to tell you, Emily, I have a lot of criticism towards the state of Israel from allowing them to even cover the stories from the ground. Israel should have kicked out Al Jazeera journalists a long time ago. We know the way that they're covering this area. It's so easy to just get a press card and to travel Israel and to go wherever you want, because Israel is a safe place for any journalist to come here. And we've been getting unproportionate journalists from all over the world coming to cover Israel, more than any large city in Europe basically. And I think Israel should have done it years ago and kicked out Al Jazeera journalists from its territory. And I
now, obviously, a critic of Israel would say that this is a form of violation of, freedom of speech and, of course, freedom of press. What would be your response to that? Why is Al Jazeera different than perhaps people who are simply critical?
Because Al Jazeera is basically educating their people for terror. They're supporting terror. They're supporting what is happening in Gaza. They're spreading lies about what has happened here on October 7th. They're spreading lies about what is happening now with the war. And I think Israel shouldn't just, hand out press cards to journalists who are not really doing their job. It's as simple as that. I'll tell you another thing. I think Israel should also kick out the UN offices from East Jerusalem, because once you're seeing UNRWA, once you're seeing UN workers actively participated in the October 7th massacre, Israel should tell the UN, take your offices from East Jerusalem and come back after you deeply do research about what is happening within your organization. And after that, to call for the closing of UNRWA.
Final question. When it comes to the international media, how do you think they should be reporting this conflict? What are they lacking? You spoke a little bit about it, but if you could elaborate a little more on what they should be speaking about when it comes to this conflict. What's not being heard?
What's not being heard, I think, is the truth, is basically the story of a tiny Jewish country, a democratic country, a Western country who's fighting this war not just for itself, but for the entire free world. We're talking about freedom, about values of democracy, about women's rights, about all these things that you don't see in any Arab countries around us. And by the world being so hypocritical about what is happening in Israel, I think it's a pure disgrace. And I'm not just saying stand for Israel. I'm saying stand for the truth, stand for the facts. Don't forget what is happening in Israel. Whilst you're showing coverage of the Gaza Strip, show also the rockets that we're getting. Tens of rockets every day from Lebanon, the rockets that we're getting from Gaza, the rockets that we're getting from Yemen, the chanting of the leaders of Iran for the destruction of the state of Israel. Every single day, terror attacks from the Palestinian Authority towards Israel. That's our day-to-day life. From the moment I remember myself, I was in constant wars in Israel. Iraq was sending rockets at us when I was in preschool. Lebanon, Syria, this is how we were raised in Israel, constantly fighting for our right to exist. And I think the world should wake up, because if they won't stand next to Israel, they will find it knocking on their back door.
Lital Shemesh, news anchor, Channel 14 Israel, and author of Pay for Slay. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Emily.